Thank you again, everyone, for joining us on today's webinar for New Market Tax Credits. Our two presenters today, we have Jennifer Trapinski and Jill Steen. Jen is a Senior Loan Officer at CSH, and she originates and underwrites acquisition and pre-development loans for supportive and affordable housing developments. Based in CSH's national headquarters in New York City, Jen focuses on the New York metro area, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, where she has underwritten over $55 million in loans. She also currently serves on the board of Women in Housing and Finance of New York. Jill Steen is Director of CSH's New Markets Tax Credit Program, responsible for its day-to-day management. Jill joined CSH in August 2015, bringing nearly 20 years of community and economic development experience. Prior to joining CSH, she was a Senior Loan Officer with LISC's New Markets Support Company for 7 years, originating New Market Tax Credit investments. Welcome, Jen and Jill. Thanks for joining us.
Great. Thank you, Val. And thank you for the opportunity to participate in this webinar this afternoon. Hello, everyone. I'm Jen Trapinski. As Val mentioned, I'm a Senior Loan Officer based that covers Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York. I will be providing a brief introduction of CSH before passing off the baton to Jill, who will really dive into the meat of the webinar on new market tax credits. The CSH is a national nonprofit intermediary and community development finance institution with a mission to advance solutions that use housing as a platform for services to improve the lives of the most vulnerable people, maximize public resources, and build healthy communities. CSH has 4 lines of business to achieve our mission. First, we provide training and education, of which this webinar is a part of that. We conduct local, state, and federal policy reform, provide consulting and assistance to service providers and developers across the country, and we also have our lending, or our community investment arm, where we provide financial products for the development of supportive housing and also new market tax credits for capital projects, providing healthcare facilities and services to vulnerable populations. Just a quick plug for our 3rd annual summit. CSH holds our national conference every year. This is our 3rd year, and it's going to be held in Denver at the end of this month. We have over 700 folks registered for the conference and have several different education tracks, one of which is the Finance and Development track, which will also cover topics like new market tax credits, development, joint venture partnerships, and financing for supportive housing. Now, as mentioned, CSH is a national organization. We have over 130 staff across the country, and particular to this afternoon's webinar, we have 12 community investment staff, which includes loan officers and new market tax credit staff located across the country that have local expertise. And CSH has several financing products, including the new market tax credit, which we will talk about today. But first, I did want to mention that a bulk of our financing has been provided through early stage financing for supportive housing projects. We have early stage loans for supportive and affordable housing development, first of which is our project initiation loan, an early stage loan, or what I like to call a pre-development loan, used for feasibility analysis of a project. This is primarily used for architect fees, feasibility studies, appraisals. Once the project moves on to a real viable stage, we have our pre-development loan, which can go up to $500,000 unsecured. And we also provide acquisition loans to help folks acquire properties for the development of affordable and supportive housing. We can go up to 130% of loan to value to ensure that you have sufficient pre-development funds to complete your project. But this webinar is about another financing product, the New Market Tax Credit. So I will now hand off the control and the presentation to Jill Steen, our Director of our New Market Tax Credit Program.
Okay, thank you, Jen, and hi everyone. I'm Jill Steen, and I oversee CSH's New Market Tax Credit Program, and I'm based in Chicago, Illinois. And so I'm happy to be here and want to thank the Pennsylvania Housing Alliance for having us. So today my presentation is going to provide an overview of new market tax credits and how they work. I'll help to identify some of the key benefits and considerations in taking on a new market tax credit project, and then discuss how to access new market tax credits if you're interested. And then I'll provide an overview of 2 projects in Philadelphia that were financed by CSH, both of which have a housing component. In addition, I'm hoping to leave about 15 minutes or so at the end of my presentation for you to ask any questions that you might have about the program and my presentation. So in terms of some background on the program, the New Market Tax Credit Program is a federal government program that started in 2000 with the Community Renewal Tax Relief Act. It took a couple of years to get the program really up and running, and so since then there have been 13 rounds of new market tax credit allocation that's been awarded. The program is managed by the U.S. Department of Treasury's CDFI fund and is jointly administered by the IRS. So as with most federal tax programs, there are a lot of rules and regulations that go along with the program. The overall purpose of the program is really to stimulate private investment in low-income communities, which are defined in terms of qualified census tracts, and to expand jobs and services for low-income people. While low-income housing tax credits are focused on supporting affordable housing development, new market tax credits is really focused on supporting business development nationally. Unlike the low-income housing tax credit, which has been a permanent part of the tax code historically, the New Market Tax Credit Program has not been. Historically, the program has had to be reauthorized every year, and there's always been some level of uncertainty if the program would continue. However, over the years, the industry has somewhat accepted this uncertainty. In 2014, however, the program was for the first time extended for a 5-year period through 2019. And since its inception, the program has authorized $50.5 billion in new market tax credits at a level of about $3.5 billion per year. With the new administration and proposed tax reform, there has been some concern in the industry about whether the program might be eliminated or whether or not it will be reauthorized beyond 2019. However, historically, the program has had bipartisan support, and the fact that the program is really targeting business development and job creation, which is well aligned with the new administration's goals, people are hopefully optimistic that the program will continue. So in terms of CSH's New Market Tax Credit Program, to date we've been awarded $130 million in 3 separate allocation rounds, with $65 million awarded to us in the most recent allocation round that was announced at the end of November. To date, we've closed 7 projects, and we'll invest in another 6 projects in the next year or so. In terms of our investment strategy, CSH really targets our allocation. We're national, so we can invest nationally. And we target our allocation to projects that provide health care or other critical support services for homeless and high health need populations. And we also look for projects that are either co-located or have other connections to permanent supportive housing. And so along with our new market tax credit allocation, CSH utilizes its consulting and training team and provides free technical assistance and training to our borrowers to help better connect the support services we're financing with the new market tax credits with supportive housing developments and projects. So I'm going to start with a very high-level overview of sort of how new market tax credits work, and I'll kind of then get into the more nitty-gritty details. So new market tax credit allocation is awarded annually to community development entities, or CDEs, such as CSH, that apply through a very competitive application process to the CDFI fund each year. And those CDEs that receive allocation, also known as allocatees, select the projects in which to invest those tax credits based on its own unique investment strategy. Equity for projects is raised from investors who are the major banks, who make an equity investment in a project, and in return they receive a tax credit against their federal tax liability, which is taken in increments over a 7-year period. The new market tax credits is most commonly used to finance real estate or facility expansion projects by businesses, but also it can be used to finance operating businesses, to provide working capital, or to fund equipment purchases. But by far the most common use of new market tax credits is really for facility development and expansion. So unlike the low-income housing tax credit or historic tax credits, where the equity for a project is really raised based on project expenditures and the project budget, with new market tax credits, the equity is generated by leveraging other project financing sources in the new market tax credit structure. New market tax credits can fill a project financing gap of about 15 to 25% of project cost, which is dependent on the pricing of the equity from investors, new market tax credit closing costs and expenses, as well as related CDE fees and expenses and whether or not they're reserved up front, and the overall size of the project. There are certain fixed costs associated with closing a new market tax credit transaction that have a much greater impact on smaller projects, so there's less equity benefit. So the smallest deal size for a traditional new market tax credit financing is typically around $5 million. The 75 to 85% of other financing to be leveraged into the new market tax credit structure will also need to comply with various new market tax credit financing requirements and regulations, which I'll discuss later in this presentation. So at the end of the day, the new market tax credit financing is typically structured as a loan to a borrower or a QLICI with an equity component that fills the financing gap at closing, and the equity component can be realized at the end of the 7-year new market tax credit compliance term. So in order to qualify for new market tax credits, a project must be located in a qualified low-income census tract. Qualified census tracts are those where the poverty rate is greater than 20% or the median family income is at or below 80% of AMI. However, the federal government favors community development entities that have committed to invest its allocation in severely distressed low-income communities. And I think all of the CDEs that were awarded in the last round had made that commitment to really try to target their investments to these areas. So severely distressed census tracts are those where the poverty rate is greater than 30%, the median family income is at or below 60% of AMI, the unemployment rate is more than 1.5 times the national average, or it's a census tract that is located in a rural or non-metro area in order to encourage economic development in rural areas. Luckily, the CDFI fund does offer a mapping system where you can enter a project address and look it up to see if it's eligible for new markets, and I've provided that link here on the slide. There are also a number of secondary factors that can be used to qualify the project as being located in a severely distressed area, and those are listed on the CDFI fund website as well. But some of the key ones I've listed here, which include being located in a redevelopment area, local redevelopment areas such as a TIF district, or being in a medically underserved area and providing medical services. I'll also note that there are ways that a project that's not located in a qualifying census tract could potentially be qualified through the people the project is going to serve through a targeted populations approach. But this is not done very often, and so I'm not going to spend the time to go over the details of that approach here. So as mentioned earlier, new market tax credits is really focused on business development. Eligible businesses for new market tax credits include industrial, commercial, retail, and office, as well as a broad range of community facility type businesses such as health centers, charter schools, and other social service type businesses. Consistent with other federal government programs, there are also ineligible uses, which include what's often referred to as sin businesses, as well as for new market tax credits, golf courses are excluded, as well as certain farming businesses, which are not eligible. Also, rental residential property is also specifically excluded as being eligible for new market tax credits unless it's part of a mixed-use building where the commercial portion generates at least 20% of the income of the building. For tax purposes, this is, from IRS perspective, this building then would be considered commercial rather than residential in nature. And so commercial in this context really means commercially leased to space, which could include nonprofit and community facility type uses as tenants in the building. So it doesn't need to be traditional like commercial office or retail. New market tax credit rules also specifically prohibit the use of low-income housing tax credits and new market tax credits on the same project as part of a single financing. However, there are two ways that new market tax credits can be used to finance mixed-use commercial projects with residential uses above. The first is to finance the entire mixed-use building with new market tax credits. In order to do so, you need to ensure that at closing and throughout the new market tax credit compliance term that at least 20% of the income of the building comes from the commercial portion. And many investors and CDEs will require a higher underwriting threshold just to protect against and account for vacancy risk and rent escalations. So in addition, at least 20% of the units must be affordable to those at or below 80% of AMI. And I will also note that new market tax credits is a shallower subsidy compared to low-income housing tax credits. So while the housing units that are financed with new market tax credits are often targeted at higher income limits compared to those that might be financed with low-income housing tax credits. The second approach is to create a condominium structure where the new market tax credits is used to finance the commercial condominium and the low-income housing tax credits are used to finance the housing piece. In this approach, you just need to have a clear approach with how you allocate shared elements of the building. And sometimes it's difficult to meet the minimum project size threshold of $5 million when you're just financing the commercial portion. So the size of the project is important to take into consideration with this approach. So as typical with most government programs, there are a lot of acronyms associated with new market tax credits. This slide outlines some of the key acronyms that you'll hear in the context of the program in a way that sort of helps to understand what they mean and how they're related. As defined earlier, community development entities, or CDEs, are those entities that apply for and receive new market tax credit allocation. And those CDEs must use substantially all or sub all of its proceeds it receives as qualified equity investments, or QEIs, to make qualified low-income community investments, also known as QLICIs, and qualified active low-income community businesses, or QLICBs, located in low-income communities, which are those qualified census tracts that I previously outlined. So my next set of slides will go through in more detail what these acronyms mean and who the key players are in a financing. So this slide shows the most typical structure of a new market tax credit financing for a project, and it's called the leverage structure. A good way to think about the structure is as a funnel from the top down. So in the upper left corner, an investor makes an equity investment into an investment fund based on the tax credits it's going to receive and based on their pricing. A leverage lender, which is shown in the upper right-hand corner, makes a loan to the investment fund, often utilizing the other project financing sources that have been raised to finance the project. But this could also be a bank loan or a loan from a CDFI. So these funds are pooled into the investment fund, and then the investment fund invests those funds, those pooled funds, as a qualified equity investment, or QEI, into the sub-CDE. And this is so the QEI equals the new market tax credit allocation that's provided to the project, and it's also equal to the investor equity plus the leverage loan amount at the upper tier. The sub-CDE then uses these funds to make a loan called a QLICI, or a qualified low-income community investment, to a borrower, which is also called the QLICI. Within the structure, the allocateur, the CDE, is committing allocation to the project. It transfers the new market tax credit allocation to a subsidiary, and by doing so, it allows the investor to claim the tax credits that have been generated by that allocation for this project. It is common in this structure for the project sponsor to set up a special purpose entity as the QLICI borrower that will own the real estate and build the project, and then will lease the facility back to its operating affiliate, who will operate the project through the compliance term. The equity investor provides so now I'm going to just run through the key financing parties. So the equity investor provides the new market's equity to the project, which is typically one of the major banks. There's very strong appetite for new market tax credits among the major banks, so it's not typically hard to find an investor to invest in a project. The amount of equity invested is really based on the proposed pricing per credit from the investor, which varies from investor to investor and from project to project for various reasons. But right now, pricing that I have seen in the marketplace is tightly been ranging from 86 to 88 cents per credit. The investment allows the investor then to claim credits against its federal tax liability over a 7-year period, totaling 39% of the qualified equity investment, which is taken in increments at a rate of 5% for the first 3 years and 6% for the last 4 years of the investment. It's for this reason why it's very important for the investor to keep its funds invested for the full 7 years, because it's taking their credits over time over the 7-year compliance term. So in this example, for every $1 million in QEI that's made, the investor will receive about $390,000 in credits, which is based on 87-cent pricing per credit, which would result in gross new market tax credit equity of the project of about $340,000. And so for a $10 million investment or project size, the gross equity that could be raised is around $3.4 million. So the leverage lender in the transaction makes a loan to the investment fund, which is pooled with the new market tax credit equity in order to make the qualified equity investment into the CDE. The leverage lender can be a bank, a CDFI, or another lender, but it's often the project sponsor or an affiliate of the project sponsor who uses the funds that it has raised to finance the project to make the loan to the investment fund. There are a number of terms that are required of the leverage lender that are important to note. The first is that all of the funds need to be available and funded on the day of closing. So certain funds, such as government grants that might be paid out over time through construction, would need to be bridged in order to be leveraged in the new market structure. The loan term is also for a period of 7 years, and it allows for only interest-only payments to be made through the structure. There is typically no direct real estate collateral from the project that will be allowed to support that loan. And the lender of the leverage loan must agree to forbear its ability to foreclose on its interest during the 7-year compliance term in order to maintain the new market tax credit structure. While there are banks and CDFIs out there that have become comfortable with these terms, particularly for financially strong projects and borrowers, this is a risky position to be in, which is another reason why the leverage lender is often the sponsor who may take a loan outside of the new market tax credit structure and then leverage the proceeds. This way, a bank or a hard lender can require principal payments or other collateral be assigned to their loan. So a community development entity I've talked about before applies for the new market tax credits and then allocates those credits to projects. The CDE may be a CDFI, such as CSH, or an affiliate of a bank, which is common. Most of the major banks also have allocation in addition to investing in new markets. An affiliate, it could also be an affiliate of a government agency. There's a lot of cities out there that have applied and been successful and have new markets allocation. And it could be other not-for-profit or for-profit entities. What is key to being a CDE is that it be certified with the CDFI fund, and it must have as a mission to serve low-income communities, and it's held accountable to those low-income communities through representation on its governing or advisory board. So the last player in the structure is the QLICI or QLICI loan borrower. The QLICI, as I mentioned, is a business or a developer that is typically undertaking a real estate facility expansion project in a low-income community and is looking to fill a capital financing gap. Most often it's a special purpose entity established by a business to develop and own the project and lease it back to its operating business. The QLICI can also just be an operating business, but it must meet various tests related to how it conducts business in the low-income community, and that needs to be met at closing and maintained through the compliance terms. So it's quite complex, but it is done, particularly for industrial and large commercial businesses. So setting up a special purpose entity makes it easier not only to qualify, but also helps to simplify things through the compliance term. So the new market tax credit financing will ultimately provide a QLICI loan to the QLICI borrower, and that loan will typically have a term of 25 to 30 years with interest-only payments for the first 7. It'll have a put-call option at the end of the 7-year term, which may be exercised to realize the new market tax credit equity investment at the end, and it will have a first position mortgage on the project as collateral. The interest rate on the loan is generally a weighted average of 0% on the equity piece of the loan, and the rate of the leverage loan, making it well below market, especially if the source of the leverage are grant funds. The loan will be fully funded on the day of closing into a disbursement account, and then will be drawn through construction, just like a construction loan. And the funds will be required to be drawn within a 12-month period, but possibly up to 18 months. The sponsor is also required to provide certain guarantees, such as construction completion loan payment guarantees, guarantee of CDE fees and expenses, and environmental and tax credit indemnities to the investor. So the key benefits of a new market tax credit financing for the various parties are as follows. For the sponsor, the new market tax credits fills a 15 to 25% financing gap at closing. And then the sponsor gets a below market interest only loan for a period of at least 7 years with very favorable terms. And it has the ability to realize or call on the equity portion of the loan at the end of the term. For banks and investors, investing in these new market tax credit projects help them to satisfy their Community Reinvestment Act requirements, and the investors also get a return on their investment in the form of the federal income tax credit. For CDEs and the broader community, the investment helps to move very difficult to develop projects forward, to create positive community impacts, and it helps to further community and economic development goals. The biggest risk in any new market tax credit financing is the return of capital, which, if it isn't redeployed into another project within a specified period of time, could cause the investor to not only lose its future credits, but could cause a recapture of the credits that have already been claimed. This could occur, for example, if construction of the project is not completed and the funds dispersed or pulled back, or if the project fails to operate as planned and the loan defaults, that causes the CDE lender to call on its collateral. For the leverage lender, particularly if it's a bank or a CDFI providing hard debt in the structure, there is repayment risk, and they're not likely to be able to do much about a default until the end of the new market tax credit compliance term. For the CDE, there is redeployment risk along with the investor, should any of the capital funds be returned, as well as mission risk of not generating the low-income community benefits that were anticipated and hoped for. Finally, there's reputational risk for both the investor and the CDE of funding a failed project, which could then threaten the ability of the investor and CDE to get future rounds of allocation and other types of funding through the CDFI fund. Due to these risks, new market tax credit investments are typically underwritten similar to a construction and a permanent loan to ensure that the project can be built and can be operated for 7 years, that the sponsor has the capacity and the financial strength to grow its operations, that the project can service the loan and any ongoing fees and expenses, and that the project can be refinanced or fully amortized after the new market tax credit compliance term. Another consideration for project sponsors is that there will be ongoing compliance and reporting requirements through the 7 years. Sponsors will need to manage the special purpose entity QLICI that's been created, as well as possibly a leveraged lender entity created for the financing. The sponsor will also be required to service the loans and will be obligated to submit periodic financial statements for the borrower and any guarantor entity. And because the CDE and investor are required to report annually the community impacts of the project to the CDFI fund, the sponsor and all tenants in the project will need to agree to complete an annual community impact survey, which outlines such things as jobs created, people served, and other community impacts of the project. So in terms of accessing new market tax credits, they can be accessed directly by reaching out to the CDEs or by working with investors or new market tax credit consultants that are out there in the industry who have relationships with the CDEs and know what each CDE's investment strategies are, and can also help to identify the CDEs that might be interested in your project. In the 2015-2016 round, which was actually a double round, a 2-year round, there were 120 CDEs that were awarded allocation between 20 and 100 million, and those projects are currently being selected and closed now. In a more typical single round, it's closer to like 80 or 90 CDEs that get awarded each year, and the CDFI fund creates an award book, which you can find on their website, and I created a link here, which lists the CDEs that have been awarded along with their target service area and contact information. Most CDEs will provide between 5 and 15 million in allocation per project, so for a very large transaction, multiple CDEs may be required. CDEs vary greatly in terms of their geography served. Some are national, some are targeted to cities or regions, and they also vary in terms of the asset types that they might, of projects that they might be focused on. Some focus specifically just on health centers, and others might focus on commercial and industrial type projects with very large job growth projections. And then there's a whole host of other ways that CDEs might prioritize projects. For this reason, and not only for this reason, but for other reasons as well, it's recommended that sponsors cast a very wide net when looking for allocation and reach out to a number of CDEs. It's very competitive for CDEs to be awarded allocation. I think in a typical round, it's about 30% of CDEs that apply actually get awarded. And some CDEs that are awarded in 1 year may not be awarded in the next year. In addition, the project financing requests that each CDE gets outnumbers the number of projects that they can likely invest in by a ratio of 10 to 1 often. So there is a lot of demand out there for from projects for these tax credits. So in terms of what CDEs are looking for, well, all CDEs are unique in terms of their particular business and investment strategy. All CDEs are focused on the community impacts of the project, and all are looking for significant community impacts. The higher the numbers, the better. So what CDEs are looking for is that the project meets the needs of the local community, creates high quality jobs specifically for low-income people or for low-income community residents. And those jobs, we're looking in terms of quality, we're looking for jobs that offer job training, and ways to advance and grow within the organization, and also looking for positions that pay higher than just the living wage. CDEs are also looking for projects that actually expand goods and services and people served rather than just relocated type projects. And then finally, CDEs are looking for projects that clearly serve low-income people and low-income community residents. So when approaching CDEs, it's recommended that you have the key community impact data available for each of the CDEs, because they typically look for that, along with the project address and eligibility information, sources of funding committed, project timing, and the amount of allocation that you're looking for. Some timing considerations to keep in mind is that while most CDEs accept applications on a rolling basis all the time, CDEs do have deployment deadlines that need to be met, so they can't hold their allocation indefinitely for a project to become ready. And so there are 2 times a year when CDEs are really actively looking for projects. The first is around the time of their new market tax credit application submission to the CDFI fund, so that they can profile your project in their application potentially, which for this year is now. The application, the NOAA, has been released, and CDEs right now are preparing an application to be submitted in mid-June. So if you have any projects that could be funded in 2018 or 2019, this would be a good time to reach out to CDEs so that they can include it in your they can include your project in their application and in their pipeline. The second time of year is when the awards come out, and for this current round that we're applying for now, that will be around year end or early Q1 2018. So in terms of making formal firm commitments to projects, most CDEs are looking for projects that can close in 3 to 6 months. So now I'm going to run through 2 projects that CSH has been involved with here both in Philadelphia. The first one is the Paseo Verde TOD project, which is located by Temple University. This project was a joint venture between APM and Jonathan Rose Company and consists of the development of 30,000 square feet of commercial space on the ground floor of a mixed-use building with 120 units of housing above. For this project, the commercial space and 67 of the housing units were actually financed with the new market tax credits, and 53 units were condoed separately and financed with low-income housing tax credits. The key commercial uses that were financed as part of this project included 21,000 square feet of office and program space for APM, 7,200 square feet for a community health center that's currently being operated by Public Health Management Corporation, and a 1,900 square foot locally owned pharmacy, which is currently leasing that space. Of the 120 housing units, 70 units are affordable to those at or below 80% of AMI, and the remainder are affordable up to 115% of AMI. The more deeply affordable units were funded with the low-income housing tax credits for the reasons I described earlier. And so the units that are actually financed within the New Markets project are the higher income units, with the 20% being at or below 80% of AMI as required by program requirements. For this project, Chase Bank is the investor in the transaction, and there are 4 CDEs that actually provided a total of $30 million in New Markets allocation. The leverage lenders included Chase, who provided a $9 million leverage loan to the project, TRF, who provided a $3 million loan to Bridge Energy Works money, and the project sponsor provided a loan of $9 million using various public and private sources it had raised for the project. The new market tax credit financing ultimately provided net equity to the project of $7.9 million, filling a critical financing gap for the $30 million project. This project closed in 2012, and construction was completed in 2014. So now it's been up and running for several years, and it's nearing the end of its new market tax credit compliance term. Some of the key benefits of this project included being the first Platinum LEED neighborhood project in the country, creating 127 permanent jobs, serving 3,600 low-income patients each year with primary health care and another 700 with behavioral and mental health care. And the project also offers a food buying club, which delivers reduced cost fresh produce to tenants of the project and the broader community, along with housing and financial counseling services. The second project example just closed last September and is currently under construction. This project is the Life Center at St. Bartholomew project that is being developed by New Courtland Elder Services in Northeast Philadelphia. The project involves the construction of a 15,000 square foot life center for seniors based on the national PACE model of which also stands for Program for All-Inclusive Healthcare for the Elderly, where seniors are provided a broad range of support services that they need to allow them to age in place at home rather than being prematurely institutionalized in nursing homes, which also helps to save Medicaid and Medicare dollars. This new facility will provide primary care, specialty care, occupational and physical therapy, and a pharmacy, as well as meals service, adult daycare, transportation to and from the facility, excuse me, and home health care when needed. This project is co-located with 42 units of low-income housing tax credits, all targeted to seniors at or below 30% of AMI, and those units are subsidized with a RAD conversion. And it should be noted that there's another 101 units planned on site as a second phase to this project. And in this transaction, Chase is the investor, and CSH and Chase provided a total of $12.4 million in new markets allocation. The leverage lender in the transaction leverage lenders, I should say, were Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation and Capital Impact Partners, who provided a leverage loan of $4 million, and the sponsor who provided a leverage loan of $4.2 million using cash that it had in hand. The new market tax credit financing ended up providing that equity as a project of $3.9 million to help the sponsor fully fund the $12.6 million project. So the projected community impacts of this project include 111 construction jobs and 62 permanent jobs, with 30% of all of those jobs targeted to low-income community residents as well as the provision of comprehensive health and support services to 200 nursing home eligible seniors to be served each year. So I think that wraps up my presentation, and I guess I will open it up to any questions that people have.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Jen and Jill. It was very informative. If anyone has any questions, they are welcome to do *7. That will unmute your lines, and then you could ask a question.
Yeah, Jill, Stephen Fisher had a question about PHAs, Public Housing Authorities, being considered a CDE. Do you have experience with Public Housing Authorities serving as CDEs?
I don't. I will say public entities do set up CDEs, so like the City of Chicago, the Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation, which I think is somehow quasi-public, so I don't know that there's anything restricting a housing authority per se to be a CDE, and public agencies have created CDEs, so I don't see it being any different. The only thing I would question is whether or not, because this program is really targeted to commercial and service development, if, I think that there would need to be a case made that that housing authority is undertaking those types of projects in addition to just the housing piece, because housing on its own is specifically excluded from eligibility.
Mm-hmm.
I do see another question someone posed. On the last project, how is the low-income housing tax credit piece structured in combination with the new market tax credit? Are they all in the same physical structure?
They're in the same physical structure. So it was two separate condominiums. I think you can go back to the photo. Is there a way to go back to the photo?
Yes.
Oh, there we go. So here's the building. the Life Center is actually on the ground floor of the entire building, and then the upper floor is the housing, and it's two separate condominiums. So the low-income housing tax credits, is financing the upper floors, and the new market tax credits is financing the first floor.
And Jill, that was the same structure on Paseo Verde where the affordable housing units were condoed out and financed separately, correct?
Yep. And so here is the Paseo Verde photo. And yeah, the low-income housing tax credits are on the upper floors, and the health center and all the commercial is on the first floor of the building. So that's how the condominium structure worked.
There's a question from Joseph Kelly. I know hotels might not be in your wheelhouse, but what is the current thinking about new market tax credit financing for this use?
I think the key thing, there was some bad press about hotels and whether or not, those hotels are really serving the low-income community that it might be located in. And so I think what's key, because, especially if, they're market rate type hotels, collecting a market rate, price for hotel stay. So I think the key thing, I will say that I don't know if it's the most desired use. I think there's also data that shows that hotels don't generate a lot of jobs and full-time jobs with benefits and high-paying jobs. So I think there's been that criticism too. And so, CSH obviously doesn't focus on that just given the nature of our CDE and our investment strategy. I don't know that it's been completely excluded, but I will say I don't see a lot. When I worked at LISC, I used to see kind of a lot of proposals for hotels. And then, those requests went down significantly, and I can't speak for all CDEs out there, but it just may not have been sort of prioritized high enough, even though it's a qualified use. Most CDEs investment strategies may not prioritize hotels for the reasons I just mentioned. I think it's the job creation, and is it really serving low-income people?
Stephen Fisher, it looks like you have your hand raised. Are you able to do *7 and ask the question?
Yes, thank you. Going back to my question about public housing authorities being considered CDEs, the project we have in mind is largely, if not predominantly, commercial. So I'm thinking we could make a good case for that consideration. What do you think?
Oh, definitely. I was misunderstanding your question. So CDEs apply to the federal government and get awarded the tax credits in order to then turn around and fund projects such as yours. And so I will say CSH right now is financing a project with the Denver Housing Authority that basically includes a senior center with a health center focused on seniors. And it's a co-location, and this is the first time I'm actually doing 3 transactions in sort of one day of closing funding, but it involves 4% low-income housing tax credits, 9% low-income housing tax credits, and then the new market tax credits financing the Senior Activity Center. And I've also worked with the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority on a project that was another Senior Activity Center that LISC happened to finance years ago. And so those types of uses are definitely very attractive, I guess, for CDEs to invest in. I think I misunderstood your question. And I would love to hear more about it. If you wanted to share it with me, I'm happy to take a look at it.
Call me anytime.
Hey, Jill, there's a clarifying question. Jeffrey Fields clarifying that on the slide it says 67 of the housing units are funded with new market tax credits and 53 with low-income housing tax credits. I know a portion of the new market tax credits can be used for housing. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so the new market tax credit project for Paseo Verde was a mixed-use building. So it included the commercial portion of the building plus 67 of the units. And of those 67 units, 17 are affordable to those at or below 80% of AMI, which is consistent with the rules. And so if you look at that portion of the project, 30% at least 20% of the income of the building is coming from the commercial leases. So it allows that project to be financed together as one financing with the new market tax credits. And then there's 53 units then that were their own separate condo, and those were financed with low-income housing tax credits, and those tend to be the units with the lower sort of affordability thresholds, just because LIHTC is just a deeper subsidy that can finance or can subsidize up to maybe 50% of costs, where new market tax credits can only finance up to about maybe 25% of project costs. So that's why it was structured that way. Does that answer your question, or am I?
Yeah, it looks like it.
Okay.
Another question someone wrote in, can entitlement jurisdictions that receive CDBG and ESG funding apply for the new market tax credits?
I'm not sure what entitlement jurisdictions are. Can you clarify?
It's Ronald Lynn Latham. Can you do *7 so you could speak if you're able to?
Hello?
Yes.
Yes. So I work for HUD. So the entitlement jurisdictions are jurisdictions that receive money from the Office of Community Planning and Development. So they receive community development block grant funds or home funds or emergency shelter grant funds. Would they be able to apply for new market tax credits?
Again, if it's a public agency, there's other public agencies out there that have applied and been successful in new market tax credit awards. And so I don't know what distinguishes this jurisdiction that you're speaking of, but it sounds like a public agency. And public agencies...
Well, it's a government agency. So,
yeah.
For instance, Montgomery County is considered an entitlement jurisdiction because it gets CDBG funds and it gets home funds. And usually they use those funds to do like infrastructure or create affordable housing or other things within the community. So I'm just wondering if they have CDBG and if they do LIHTC, could they also apply for new market tax credits?
Yes, they could. I wouldn't see why not. They have to have, I think the key thing is having the mission to low-income communities.
Right.
And so as long as that case can be made and it can, the agency can be certified as a CDE with the CDFI fund, and I haven't actually gone through the details of that process, but you could definitely poke around the CDFI fund website and look up the CDE. I think they just released it because in order to apply for new markets, you have to first become certified as a CDE with the CDFI fund. So I'm sure that document is out there on their website, and you should take a look at it and just see what type of questions they ask. But I don't see any reason why that wouldn't be possible.
Okay. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Any other questions? *7 to unmute and ask. Someone did ask about the PowerPoint slides, and they will be sent out early next week. We will be sharing those with everyone on the call. So thank you for that. There are a couple of more minutes. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sure. I just, if folks are thinking about using new market tax credits and they don't have experience with the program, or have a project where they're thinking about applying for new market tax credits, what should they do? Who can they turn to for help?
So, I'm happy to refer folks to consultants. There's a number of sponsor consultants. I am happy to answer, general questions that you might have, but I do often, because this program is so highly technical with all the tax and accounting rules that go along with it, and also because the program involves community facility type projects where, like with health centers and social service providers that really aren't in the business of doing real estate development, on top of the fact that this is a very complicated kind of real estate financing that requires setting up special entities and things like that. It's very, very helpful to have a new market tax credit consultant on board, and we definitely have names that we could share with you that work nationally and are very well regarded, that sort of help explain the process, could help with your board getting people comfortable with the program and what's being done and why it's being done. And they also just have connections in the industry about finding CDE allocation. They do a lot of legwork, getting the information pulled together that CDEs and investors are going to be looking for your project. So they definitely have a value, and I think a lot of them will hold a portion of their fee back to the funding of the project. I'm not exactly sure how they all structure their funding, but definitely I feel like it's a worthwhile investment if you're taking on a large project such as this and you're looking for allocation. But I'm also happy to answer any questions people have. So if you have any general questions as a follow-up, I'm happy to do the best I can to answer them. And to help out, and I'm happy to refer you to other folks in the industry that might be good to talk to.
Right. I believe your contact information was on that last slide, so when we send that out next week, people will have your email and so forth to reach out.
Yep.
Thank you.
There's one last question in the chat box. Low-income housing tax credit projects are guided by state and federal regulations for affordable housing. Is this the case for new market tax credits?
It's all federal regulations, so there's really no state regulations. It's the federal government, and it's a federal tax program. I will say there are states out there, though, I'm going to caveat that have instituted their own state new market tax credit program. So in those states, I think Illinois is one of them. Ohio is another one of them. I'm financing a deal with Ohio state credits. So those states that actually have a state credit, there would be regulations and that apply, and but this federal program, it's just federal regulations that really apply for the most part.
Great. Well, that takes us right to 1 o'clock. Perfect timing. So thank you both so much for presenting on this webinar, Jen and Jill. We really appreciate your time. And once again, we will be sharing this next week with everyone. And I want to just thank everyone for joining us today, and have yourselves a great weekend.
All right, great. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Okay. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye.